Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. Former Northwestern football players speak out on the culture of sexualized hazing at the embattled program.
And when it happens, it's uncontrollable. It's uncontrollable. You're overpowered you're dominated by, the culture.
Northwestern football alums break their silence. Lawsuits against the school multiply, and a lawyer for former head coach Pat Fitzgerald maintains he didn't know anything.
Now the political posturing is over and it's time for implementation.
By a 5-2 vote, the Illinois Supreme Court greenlights the elimination of cash bail as prosecutors and judges scramble to get ready.
I don't want to get those phone calls from my residents saying, when's the city finna plow my sidewalk?
City Council slowly inches forward on sidewalk snow removal, as well as paid time off and tipped minimum wage proposals. Could government mole Danny Solis testify in the trial of Ed Burke?
So set 'em up, Joe.
And remembering Ravinia favorite and American icon Tony Bennett, dead today at 96 years old.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Dan Bernstein of WSCR 670 The Score, Cheryl Corley of National Public Radio, Alex Hernandez of Block Club Chicago, and joining us via Zoom, Dave McKinney of WBEZ Chicago. Let's get right into it. Dan Bernstein, what did you make of what former Northwestern player Lloyd Yates had to say this week?
I found it immensely compelling and terribly sad, courageous of him to do it. He's just one of many already, and there will be many more telling their stories. And since I left the green room and sat down here, I guarantee you there's another headline, there's another story of new information that's emerging. It is a rapidly developing story, in no way positively for Northwestern. Even holding it to just this, and Fitzgerald and the hazing is only a tiny part of it because of the allegations of racism as well, because of what's happening with the baseball coach being fired, what's happening with hazing incidents in other sports. This is a profound situation for the very essence of what Northwestern stands for.
Seems like an earthquake for that entire sports department. And let's hear a little bit of what former quarterback Lloyd Yates, who spoke publicly this week, had to say.
Playing college football, playing Big Ten, and we wanted to, be accepted. We wanted to fit in. We wanted to earn trust and respect. And if you went against that, you were an outcast. You were labeled, and it warranted further abuse.
And Cheryl Corley, right to his left, is national civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who does get a lot of attention for these big heater cases. So give us a sense of the scope now of the legal situation for Northwestern.
I think as soon as Ben Crump walked onto the stage, that Northwestern just shook. Because, these are the kinds of cases that he takes on. It's has widespread cases that have widespread implications, and this case obviously does. So I think that, as you mentioned, we might be seeing a lot more coming out because they're going to be seeking more people to come forward and be part of this case.
There are multiple lawsuits. We learned of new lawsuits even today. When you hear the attorney for Patrick Fitzgerald, Dan Webb, say, hey, still show us the proof that the head coach, the leader of this football program, knew anything about any of this. What do you make of those statements?
I don't really add much credence to the fact that his argument is that I didn't know, just because of, if he didn't know, it's been going on for multiple years according to the victims. That's just another huge red flag. If it had been going on for that long, where the student paper broke that story, campus was aware of it. Your argument is I didn't know. That doesn't really hold water to me. And if it does, if that's accurate, well, that's horrifying on its own way.
And Dan Webb is one of the most high-priced attorneys you could find, Dan Bernstein. What is the purpose of Webb going out and making these statements when it doesn't seem like there's any legal action that Fitzgerald is taking yet?
Apparently because Fitzgerald wants to spend $1,500 an hour on the highest paid spokesman he can find. Because until Dan Webb files a suit, you don't need a lawyer yet. And you can rattle those sabers all you want, and you can send out all of your letters full of high dudgeon. But until they take on discovery, until they say we are going to open this up to sworn depositions going back however many years, it's all just posturing and bluster.
You mentioned that several dominoes are falling hour by hour, so what are the next shoes to drop here? I mean, there's a staff of coaches that are still there despite being around for the Fitzgerald tenure.
And the assistant head coach just had his name pulled into things as an eyewitness to both the sexualized hazing and the naked pull-ups, etc., by USA Today. That dropped late last night. There will be more. They're not going to do this. What they should do is, first of all, suspend the athletic director, Derek Gregg, immediately and indefinitely. Then they should suspend the football program, if not other sports where this is going on. The fact that they are playing football.
They're weeks away from a season.
They've got media day. They're going to trot out an interim head coach on media day to be the face of this because the president, Schill, hasn't talked. The athletic director hasn't talked. They are putting this all on an interim guy that they hired just last year. The fact that they're playing football is an ironic statement about just how the hegemon of football culture has infected that university.
It's not as if they were, burning up the field, though. They were 1-11 last year. So what is their future as a program competing in the Big Ten?
It'll be however much money they want to spend and however they can find a continued recruiting pipeline. It is a seductive addiction for a college to love football too much. Look what happened years ago to the University of Chicago when the academic powers that be decided enough already. Amos Alonzo Stagg can't be the most powerful man on this campus. We're dropping the program for decades until they came back as Division III.
Indeed, the president of Northwestern, Cheryl Corley, said something to that effect, that we're going to reevaluate athletics program in the broader context of the school here. So what does that mean? That something like the University of Chicago situation could happen?
Perhaps, I don't know, but the changes, this is why he can make any changes, because he's relatively new. And, and he'll have, and trustees might be glad with that because they have a new guy on the field here who can make change and who is not as invested in the program as a president who has been around for many more years has been.
There's some very influential trustees around here. There's Pat Ryan, the founder of Aon Insurance, who is all over all the athletics on the stadium and all that. What do you think the trustees feel about this?
I think they are in a nightmare right now, and they are going to have to make some really tough decisions. And again, I think that they're going to be happy that they have a new guy on the block who can make changes and not be blamed as much as someone who has been around for a long time.
Dave McKinney, I got to bring you in here on Zoom. You've been listening to all this. What's your perspective on everything that's going on at that school and what their future is?
As I was sitting here listening to the expert analysis from your panel here, the thing that just kind of blows me away about this is that, it's not as if this type of problem is new to an environment like Northwestern. I mean, you look at what happened at Penn State. You look at what happened at Michigan State. You look what happened in all of our backyards with the Chicago Blackhawks. And it's situation after situation after situation where these institutions are having to pay out tens of millions of dollars because of people being asleep at the switch and this kind of conduct, this kind of misconduct happening beneath people's noses. And that's what's so surprising to me, because every single institution that deals with young people should be acutely aware of this kind of situation happening. And Northwestern, if these allegations are accurate, was not.
And I want to mention, too, that Northwestern had its own scandal, another hazing scandal already with women's soccer. And it's important, I think, that the Chicago Blackhawks were mentioned there for the primary reason that Rocky Wirtz is a member of the Board of Trustees of Northwestern University.
So he has some experience with it, and it seems like Northwestern handled this like the Blackhawks did. They kind of tried to wash their hands of it and hope it would go away.
Well, the Blackhawks actually had a meeting in which all of the principals actively decided, like cartoon villains, to cover it up. This one is going to be much more difficult to unravel because of the multiple layers of plausible deniability all along the chain.
Much more to come on this. We know we have to move on to some of the other news of the week. And Dave McKinney, who, by the way, broke a lot of that Blackhawks story a couple years back. But Dave, the Supreme Court in Illinois this week rules that cash bail is good to go, despite the lower court saying it was against the state constitution. So why did the high court differ?
Well, I mean, the high court took a look at this and gave deference to the General Assembly and the will of the supermajorities of the General Assembly. I don't think that the outcome here is at all surprising, but what it does show is that elections have consequences because, if we zoom backwards to the last election, there was a chance that Republicans had to take control of the state Supreme Court. There were open seats in Lake County and DuPage County, and both of those were Republican-leaning places, and in both cases, Democrats won, and the majority of the court swung that way. I think it's an interesting issue because, politically, this has played out, this has been playing out almost since the moment the legislature and the Governor Pritzker, enacted this. And we had an election that was built around this thing entirely. I think Republicans are chomping at the bit to try to make something out of this. But we had an election, a gubernatorial election, where this was front and center, this issue. And Pritzker prevailed. So I think.
Well, I was just going to say, Alex Hernandez, you still have prosecutors downstate that might be more conservative that don't want to implement this, but they have to now. They have a matter of several weeks. So how do you think the implementation now is going to go?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I think Cook County is probably positioned best to implement it just because they were one of the counties, the state's attorney here, Kim Foxx, advocated for it. They were ready to go, from what I understand, at the start of the year. And if anything, they've had additional overtime, essentially, to figure out how they were going to implement it here. Downstate, they spent more time basically trying to challenge it in courts. So I would imagine they're probably scrambling to figure out how they're going to implement it. If anything, they're probably going to look at Cook County as the model of how that would work. And at the end of the day, basically what it is additional scrutiny when it comes down to deciding whether or not someone who has been charged is going to be held in jail, right? That's something that Cook County already does, I think since 2015, if I recall correctly. But this basically removes the cash component out of it. So it requires just more scrutiny on the part of a judge to basically listen to the argument from a prosecutor.
And the General Assembly did have to go back several times, Cheryl Corley, and tweak this because there were concerns about what kind of discretion judges would have here. So just remind us, what offenses will offenders still have to stay in jail for pre-trial, and what kind of discretion will judges have?
Well, if you've committed a crime in the past or something, a serious crime in the past, judges are going to look at your records. They're going to have assessment tools to determine whether or not you are a safety risk or not, because it all boils down to is this person going to be a harm to the public? Is this person a person who will not come back if they are let out of jail before their trial? So those are kind of the parameters that the judges have to look at. And what the advocates of this have always said is, that's what's important, and that this law makes the important issues about, who a possible offender or a person who's been charged with, those are the parameters that should be looked at, as opposed to whether or not they can pay to get out of jail.
Dave McKinney, do you see downstate more conservative prosecutors, perhaps more conservative judges, implementing this differently than perhaps a place like Cook County or Lake County?
Well, I think there will be some that try. There will be some prosecutors. Don't forget that prosecutors across the state are partisan. They're playing to the peanut gallery in some ways. They'll try to do workarounds, I would suspect. And I think that if we see any kind of egregious examples of where different counties downstate are thumbing their nose at this entirely, or not adhering to what the court said, defying the court, I think we'll see action, perhaps by the General Assembly to tighten it up even more. But I think the Supreme Court is the final say in this, and we are a state of laws, and you follow whatever the law is. And so I think at the end of the day, these downstate prosecutors, they may not like this, but at the end of the day, they are sworn to uphold the law.
There are Republicans that warn, though, this is going to put more dangerous people on the street. Dan Bernstein, you're resident of Chicago here. Do you fear that perhaps that now that judges cannot impose any kind of cash bail, it could lead to folks that could be a threat to certain individuals back out on the street?
I think that there is, as Cheryl said, going to be a trust in judges to make decisions based on histories and their professional assessment of some of those dangers. So in answer to your question, as a Chicagoan, I am not increasingly fearful, and I think that this is a good idea, a good step, and I am hoping that it succeeds long term because of the example it would set. What I do think, however, is to Dave's point about when he said that Republicans are champing at the bit to perhaps litigate it, you've got everybody who can't wait to write that campaign ad. can't wait to write the
But
campaign ad.
as Dave said, they did that in the last election, and they didn't win anything.
Not here, but it's still they haven't learned
Well,
any.
sure,
We know they
downstate.
haven't learned any
Sure,
lesson
sure,
from that,
sure.
and beyond. This has repercussions, at least from my eyes, for well outside of Chicago, for other major cities, and for other red-blue divides as we see in most American states right now.
And you have to look too at the fact that there have been places that have not used bail that much, and studies have been done about what effect that has had. Washington, D.C., New Jersey, they've looked at it extensively. D.C. hasn't used bail very sparingly since the 1990s. New Jersey hasn't used it almost as long. And there have been studies that show crime hasn't gone up because people didn't pay bail.
So there is precedent for this, although Illinois
Is the first
is the
state
first state
to actually completely get rid of it.
All right. Well, they have, like we said, about 2+ months to implement this. Alex Hernandez, I got to move over to the city, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. They take the rare step of speaking out this week, and they said that they couldn't actually identify any victims here in alleged cases of Chicago police officers having inappropriate sexual contact with migrants. So how come they can't identify any?
Yeah, so a big part of it during the press conference was the fact that the COPA chief kept on saying that they were investigating and continuing to investigate this, but as of this point, the allegations were unsubstantiated because they couldn't talk to a victim that would be part of these allegations. A big part of that is, if you think about it, a lot of the migrants that I've spoken to over the last, I think since last September that I've been reporting on this to now, come from countries like Venezuela, where speaking out against a government official, let alone a cop, could get you disappeared or killed, right? They fled those countries to the United States, came here for seeking asylum, and because of these allegations, I would imagine that from those conversations with migrants, they don't know what COPA is, right? They don't know if they can trust COPA, and that is kind of compounded with the additional language barrier and then the other issues that kind of revolve around being a victim of sexual misconduct.
Did we learn this week, though, more about where these allegations originated? And is there a chance that maybe they were spurious and didn't have a whole lot?
Yeah, so during the press conference, which was very, very odd, I guess, for COPA, is typically they'll have a press conference like that at the very end of their investigation where they kind of lay everything out. Instead, Tuesday's press conference, they said that they were still investigating, they weren't identifying where these allegations came from. They kept on calling them unsubstantiated, but they're still moving forward with them. I myself had not been able to substantiate where exactly they came from.
And indeed, there were new allegations.
And there were new
well
allegations too. So a combination of, during their search of the 10th District allegations about sexual misconduct with officers and migrants, they discovered other allegations across various other police districts where migrants were living. Of those, there were some racial slurs and some other things, but the one that like kind of elevated to the same level as the 10th District was the 19th District, where again, unsubstantiated, but again, unsubstantiated because they haven't had a victim they could find that wants to go on the record.
This is going to be tricky then to sort of investigate because of what you mentioned, distrust, language barrier. We'll have to see where this goes. Dave McKinney, we got to talk a little bit about the case of Alderman Ed Burke. At some point, it's going to go to trial. It's been about, 4+ years here of pretrial motions and discovery. But there's news this week that prosecutors are going to seek to have former Alderman Danny Solis, who was the government mole here, testify. Do you think he will end up testifying?
Well, I think, one thing that is likely is we will hear at that trial, whenever it is, we will hear recordings with Danny Solis's voice in them. So, that's probably pretty assured. The government has a lot riding on this case, and I think that it's in their interest to bring Solis out into the open. I mean, some of these, by far, he probably is the most infamous, I guess you could say, government mole that prosecutors have used in a generation in these cases. I mean, we just got off the ComEd trial where there was a mole involved as well, but he offers the government powerful testimony about what he saw happen with Ed Burke, and I think the defense is hoping and trying to fight against Solis being there, and certainly they've got. And I'm sure they've already got strategies, ready to enact to try to tear him apart on the stand if that happens. Because Danny Solis, if he takes the stand, it's not going to be for an hour. It would be for a week or longer. I mean, he will be a major witness. And for those of us who love following these cases, it will be great theater.
It certainly will be. It'll be bombshell testimony if that indeed does happen, whenever it does happen. You mentioned ComEd. The government dropped their charges against ComEd now. Does this mean that the company, their hands are kind of wiped clean of this bribery scandal now because they kind of fulfilled everything that they were supposed to in cooperating or whatnot?
Well, I mean, legally, it means that they no longer face the threat of being convicted of bribery. The government had filed a charge in 2020 of bribery against them, and the condition was that would be dropped in 3 years if ComEd cooperated fully in the ongoing investigations into Mike Madigan, and if they paid a $200 million fine. And so they fulfilled both of those things. ComEd's cooperation factored heavily in the prosecutions and convictions of former CEO Ann Pramaggiore and lobbyist Mike McLean and others. And it figures to be very important in the upcoming trial next year of former House Speaker Michael Madigan. Just because the deferred prosecution agreement is now officially in the books, ComEd is still obligated under terms of that agreement to continue cooperating in the Madigan case. So, we haven't seen the end of their involvement in it, but for the moment, or at least not for the moment, they are now off the hook legally from facing criminal charges associated with this.
And you still have the former CEO Ann Pramaggiore convicted in the ComEd 4 case, trying to appeal that sentence. Wonder if she or anyone else might at some point flip. They haven't to this point. To move on to some city council action, let's hear from Alderman Anthony Beal, who says a proposal to have the city shovel snowy sidewalks is a bad idea.
I don't want to get those phone calls from my residents saying, when's the city finna plow my sidewalk?
Cheryl Corley, so City Council here, they have this proposal where the city's going to shovel all the sidewalks, that's a lot of sidewalk. They kind of punted here and decided they'd put together some kind of study group on it, and they'll come out with the results next May after winter. So it looks like if they're going to do this, they're not going to do it in the coming winter.
Yeah. Your sidewalks will still be snow.
You'll still have to shovel them
you still
on
have
your
to
own.
shovel, yeah.
Where do you think this proposal, you've also got a tip minimum wage proposal to raise that. Where do you think these are all going to go?
I think it's going to be a long haul. I don't think that, I think residents would love the idea of their sidewalks being plowed, but I don't think, I think Alderman Bill will have a lot of sway. And also, how many people get their streets, waiting for their streets to be plowed, So.
We know the history of plowing in politics here in Chicago. It's like, my sidewalks aren't plowed. You're out of here.
Can you see how many chairs are going to be placed on
sidewalks
that are cleared out?
We also know which neighborhoods are going to be taken care of first.
Well, probably not Ed Burke's neighborhood anymore, but in the past that probably would have been the case.
Not Anthony Bill's ward either.
Well, maybe. Before we go, Dan Bernstein, one of your colleagues on the score, Pat Hughes, is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Legendary radio broadcaster, voice of the Chicago Cubs. Obviously, very well-deserved honor for him.
Oh, it's a wonderful honor for a wonderful man. And what's so special about it is he is hearing all this appreciation at this stage of his career while he is absolutely on top of his game. Pat has never sounded better, and while the quality of actual Cubs play has been up and down, the quality of the broadcast with Ron Coomer and Zach Zaidman on the score has never been as good as it is right now.
And obviously he nailed, the biggest call in Cubs history. It's in time. Cubs win the World Series 2016. What a great voice to have calling that historic moment.
It means so much to him, and he has discussed it, and to be able to watch him and see him and hear his speech that he's been working on for a long time will be a special moment in Chicago sports broadcasting history.
And so now you have the old broadcast team of Ron Santo and Pat Hughes in the Hall of Fame. That's something I'm sure Ron Santo would have been thrilled about as well. We are out of time, and our thanks to Dan Bernstein, Cheryl Corley, Alex Hernandez, and Dave McKinney. And before we leave you tonight, some good news. You might have noticed a key absence here over the past couple of weeks. Amanda Vinicky is nowhere to be found. Well, we found her at home with her precious new baby girl, Alice, born on July 3rd. Mom, Dad, and baby are all happy and healthy. Congratulations to Amanda and Mike on the addition to their family, and we look forward to Alice becoming an intern here very soon. And we know Amanda is chomping at the bit. I know she loves being at home with her new daughter, but she is chomping at the bit to chase down some of those political scoops. That is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Weekend Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And join Brandis Friedman at 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. And now we leave you with the music from the late, great Tony Bennett. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. And enjoy An American Icon.
In all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut tree, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.